you struggle with this, if you struggle with setting boundaries, if you struggle with really enmeshing with other people, you don't know where you end and the other person begins. What they love becomes what you love. Their problems become your problems. And you might know that pattern, but you don't think it comes from anywhere because your family home was so great. I'm here to let you entertain the idea that that's not true. I'm going to tell you 3 things today. I'm going to tell you what a secretive family system is, how to know if you had one or are in one, and what this has to do with your relationship patterns. So, what is a secretive family system? It is a system where the family keeps secrets. It's a system where the unspoken rule, and it's never explicit, it's never explicitly said, hey, we don't do this, but it's kind of inferred and it can be referenced in certain ways, and I'll give you an example of what that looks like in a second. But what it is this knowledge, this inherent belief that you do not talk about what happens in the family outside of the family, right? It's kind of like Vegas, only this really isn't a good time. So this can happen in an alcoholic home. This can happen in a narcissistic home. I'll explain what that is. Incidentally, there's a caveat to this. If we are looking at this and starting to go, well, they were an alcoholic, they were an addict, and they were a narcissist, and you know, my mum's a narcissist and my dad's an alcoholic, we've got to be really careful with this. So one, yes, it's helpful to understand what the family system was like and what dynamics was at play, and we're adults now. And so it's really, really important that we don't go back into that childlike place of feeling like a victim of the situation, of blaming, of pointing fingers, because that's just going to re-traumatize us and we deserve better than that. It's also not going to help us to move forward, right? Not saying that it wasn't hard. I understand the system deeply, so I get it. And it's also really important that we don't latch onto those labels and use it as a way to bypass ourselves doing the work, right? So if it's an alcoholic home, that's pretty self-explanatory, or if there's some kind of addiction, that's kind of obvious what that looks like, right? There's some person that has a problem, an addiction. Incidentally, another caveat with this one is that when we talk about addiction, we think about like Skid Row addicts, like they're under a bridge with a needle sticking out their arm, and that's addiction. Yeah, it is. And there's a lot of middle class addicts, there's a lot of working class addicts, there's a lot of upper class addicts, right? It knows no bounds. Addiction doesn't give a shit where you're from, what kind of house you live in. This could be your family, right? It doesn't negate the fact that there might have been addiction. So there could have been an addiction to a substance or a behaviour or to alcohol. There could have been an addiction to work, an addiction to sex, pornography. We may never know what the addiction was. And or there may have been some narcissism there, which means basically one person's needs superseded the needs of everyone else within the home. Right? So then what happens with that is this enmeshment. We start to get really enmeshed with everyone in the family home, and one person's problem becomes everyone's problem. So there's no boundaries there's no clear sense of self. What they're struggling with becomes what everyone struggles with, and there's this kind of codependency and enabling that happens as well, right? So how do you know if you were in a system like this? You know you're in a system like this when you hear things like, oh, we just don't talk about that. Or perhaps you created some kind of art that expressed how you were feeling at the time, whether that was writing, drawing, crafts, dance, singing, music, whatever your gift is. And perhaps you created something about your experience, and when that happened, it was made very clear by the family system, right? By the parents, by the siblings, whoever it was that said this to you, they let you know that wasn't okay. You know, they'd say something about privacy, or they'd say something about what might people think. So there's this notion of we don't talk about it. We don't talk about it. It remains within the family home. There's other parts of it as well, which I won't go into. But what I really want to get to today is, why is this relevant to your relationship patterns? It's relevant because it's likely you're in complete denial of the type of family system that you grew up in. And if you've been following me for a while, or even if you haven't, what I want you to know is that my process is, what's the pattern? Where did it come from? How do we heal it, right? 3 steps. So what we're focused on today in this example is, what is the pattern? Right? Sorry, we're focused on, we're focused on where did it come from? And where it came from was the family home. So if you're in denial about where it came from, it's going to be really difficult to take you through that process and to understand what your patterns are. So you might be like, well, I know my pattern is overgiving, but it didn't come from anywhere because my family home was pretty good. I'm here to tell you, if you struggle with this, if you struggle with setting boundaries, if you struggle with really enmeshing with other people, and what enmeshment means in non-psychological terms is you don't know where you end and the other person begins. What they love becomes what you love. Their problems become your problems. And you might know that pattern, but you don't think it comes from anywhere because your family home was so great. I'm here to let you entertain the idea that that's not true. If it was true, if your family home was really stable and really emotionally healthy, you wouldn't have the problems that you do now in relationships. If your family home was really stable and emotionally safe and emotionally healthy, you would not have these relationship patterns. Period, the end. Doesn't mean it's anyone's fault, doesn't mean we now blame the family. There's a whole system that goes involved with this. Like, everyone's feeding into this family system. It's unspoken, but it's very, very noticeable and palpable and very real. So what do you do now? Incidentally, this is the work I do with my clients, right? I help them link back, well, where did your pattern come from? And this is really the hardest part of the process because you already know what the pattern is. You just don't know where it came from. My work is helping you link back to where it came from. So that's the work that I do with clients. And as you can see, it's really deep work. It's not just like, what do you text the guy back or how do you win the girl? It's not about that. It's about what were you taught as a child and how is that impacting how you show up in relationships, and what beliefs is it giving you about your role in relationships? So a good example of that would be if you grew up in a home where someone had an addiction, or maybe it was an illness or mental health issues, whatever it was, excuse me, you will have this belief of, in a relationship, I'm the caretaker. In a relationship, I take care of others. My needs take a backseat to the needs of the other person because what they have is a crisis, right? And that may well have been the case as a child. You may have had someone that was very, very ill, mentally, physically, emotionally, whatever it might be. Maybe they had an addiction. Or maybe it wasn't the case. Maybe their needs were not more important than anyone else's. Maybe it wasn't actually a present crisis. Maybe you were just told that it was because they had some form of narcissism. Narcissism is on a spectrum as well, right? It's not that all these people have like a personality disorder. We don't want to go around diagnosing people, but they had some sense of, my needs are most important and I'm going to make sure that my needs are more important than anyone else's. So as a child, you were probably emotionally undernourished. So that shows up then in relationships as you being the caretaker, as you overgiving, of you really being disconnected from who you are and what you need. Right? If you do want to go deeper with this work, send me a message. Let me know what it is you want to achieve with this work and we'll talk through what programs are right for you.